At the age of 20, I sought a new life in a small, suffocatingly quiet town in upstate New York. My usual escape, camping in the Adirondacks, was now denied as I had no friends yet, and venturing into the deep woods alone felt like tempting fate. My isolation was turning into a profound dread. One day, I found a break in the trees, gigantic, humming power lines slicing through a dark section of the woods, perpendicular to the road. This cleared area, kept bare for maintenance, felt less like a utility path and more like a deliberate, exposed nerve in the forest. It was near a house, yet I followed a faint trail far enough to ensure privacy. The woods here grew deep, silent, and felt actively observant. A dangerous idea solidified. I could camp here. It was a secret pocket of wilderness, close to civilization. I hiked up the hill beneath the humming wires, then took the turn onto the deer trail. It wasn't a natural winding path. It felt purposefully cleared. After a short walk, I arrived at a flat, grassy clearing. Too neat, too perfect. I quickly set up my small camp, building a fire off to the side. As dusk settled, the woods closed in, silent and suffocating. The reality of sleeping alone struck me with a paralyzing fear. I'd always had a camping partner, but here, the solitude was thick and menacing. I convinced myself I managed to sleep, but the night was a series of unsettling noises. I heard twigs snapping, not from the wind, but from movement, slow, deliberate movement that skirted the very edge of my light. I could have sworn I heard a soft, dragging sound just beyond the tent canvas. In the morning, the oppressive fear of the night was replaced by a morbid compulsion to explore. I followed the main path for half an hour, seeing distant fields. Then I found a sharp, almost hidden turnoff to the right. A few feet down, the trail curved, and I stopped dead. There, on the left, sat an old, derelict 1970s-style van, completely swallowed by thorny, dark weeds. It looked like a corpse of a vehicle, despite the harsh 1 p.m. sunlight. The air around it was ice cold. The sight that made my stomach clench was the streaking. Thick lines of a dried, brownish-red residue had run down the bottom of the rusted doors, resembling oxidized blood. It had clearly been there for years, yet the sight triggered an immediate, primal warning. I approached, fighting the urge to flee, and peered inside the fogged windows. Inside the van, the scene was one of ancient violence. The back was filled with what looked like old bedding, but it was shredded into filthy tatters. The curtains on the windows were similarly ripped apart, hanging like scraps of flesh. Clothes, clearly from the late 70s or early 80s, were scattered around, damp and decomposed. For a moment, my fear was overridden by disbelief. I actually snickered at the awful, outdated fashions, a defense mechanism for a brain not yet ready to process the horror. I still didn't feel scared, just intensely unnerved. I continued walking, telling myself it was just an old, forgotten hippie crash pad. But I stopped dead in my tracks. Finally, the true, primal fear, my reptile brain, woke up and screamed at full volume. Ahead, hanging from a thick branch by a taut rope around its neck, was a creepy, vintage doll. It wasn't stuck. It was deliberately hanged, swaying slightly in a non-existent breeze. The rope was cinched tight, an obscene effigy. Just to the left, an old garage was entirely consumed by weeds. But to the right, that's where the air went thin. There stood a massive, terrifying, cage-like structure. It was easily tall and wide enough to hold a full-grown man, constructed from thick, welded metal pipes. The gaps were too small to squeeze through. The structure had 4 sides and a ceiling, designed not to keep animals in, but to trap something intelligent. More of those creepy hanged dolls dangled from the metal bars. And running down the sides of this monstrous cage were the same chilling reddish-brown stains I'd seen on the van, but heavier, thicker. Further behind this nightmare structure, a dilapidated, darkened house stood sentinel. My mind instantly pieced together the shredded bedding, the blood-like stains, and the human-sized prison. I didn't think, I only ran. I am not a runner. I was out of shape, a smoker. But that day, I was driven by pure incandescent terror. I don't remember the run, only the desperate, frantic speed. I burst into my campsite, adrenaline overriding all logic. I grabbed my tent in one panicked, continuous motion, ripping the whole thing, contents and all, out of the ground. I didn't bother with the pegs. I left my cooler, my food, everything of value behind. It wasn't worth the single second of delay. I dropped the tent stakes somewhere on the wildly uncontrolled, downward run. I flew down the hill, narrowly avoiding a neck-breaking tumble, dove into my car, and sped away, not looking in the rearview mirror until I was miles away. Once home, I locked every single door and window. I spent hours pacing, muttering one desperate phrase: "What the hell? What the hell?" The shock was total, physical. It has been 11 years since that day, and even typing this now, my hand shakes. I live almost 1,400 miles away, yet I still instinctively check that my doors are locked. The most terrifying part is realizing that this monument to sickness wasn't in some remote, uncharted wilderness. Today, there are houses within walking distance. Looking back, I should have called the police. I truly can't explain why I didn't. I think a profound, chilling fear of whoever built that cage. My first terrifying experience was followed by another years later. Back then, I was a counselor and later the craft director at a popular girls' summer camp near my hometown. It was 2005, and I was about 21. This camp was sacred to me. I had attended it as a girl, knew every hidden trail and every secret way up the ridge. The camp had no identifying signs on the roads leading up to it, giving everyone a powerful, comforting sense of being cut off from the world. We felt safe, insulated. I never thought twice about walking the grounds late at night, relying only on the faint moonlight to navigate the old, rustling trees. My job often kept me up, running the ceramics kiln or tending the fire for pottery. Isolated work that demanded late hours, high up near the ridge. It was a beloved place, but its isolation, I would soon learn, was a dangerous myth. The camp was nestled among large, ancient trees, thick brush, and a running stream. The prominent feature was a ridge that provided great climbing and a perfect, unobstructed view. Crucially, behind this ridge lay a cattle pasture owned by a local farmer, inaccessible by any public road. To reach the ridge from outside, you'd have to trespass over the cattleman's land or walk through the camp's heavily secured front gates, past a locked barrier, a tall fence, the caretaker's house, and the director's cabin. The craft house, where I worked and slept, sat right below this ridge. Other counselors often played pranks on me, tossing pebbles off the ridge onto the roof at night. I got used to the small, predictable sounds, but what started happening next was neither small nor predictable. It was my third summer as craft director, and I was seasoned, accustomed to nocturnal animal noises and silly taps on the windows from bored teens. So, when the flower bouquets started appearing, I dismissed them as a sweet gesture. They were small, childlike arrangements left on the front steps, the side door, or near the outdoor potting wheel. A couple were even found inside, which didn't concern me, as I always left the craft house unlocked for counselors or girls needing the restroom or a snack from the fridge. I assumed it was a shy girl I had tried to encourage, leaving a thank you note in petals. I proudly displayed them. How deeply naive I was. I told all the campers how kind the gesture was, hoping the anonymous admirer would enjoy the praise. The bouquets, I would soon realize, were a sign of terrifying intimacy and surveillance. About 2 weeks after the flowers began, I was up late, running the kiln, paranoid it would ignite the whole camp. I started hearing persistent, annoying tapping on the back windows. I ignored it, figuring it was another bored counselor prank. But the tapping continued, relentless and slow. I finally yelled out, threatening to return the prank with spiders or a snake in their bed. Then I heard it, a distinct burst of laughter. It was not the light, giggling sound of a girl or a teen. It was low, guttural, and undeniably a man's laugh. I spun around to the window, catching a chilling, momentary glimpse of a pair of eyes staring back at me from the darkness. I grabbed the walking hoe. I ran out just in time to see a tall shadow sprinting away toward the thick brush behind the craft house. I immediately second-guessed the voice. A man's laughter? Was I losing my mind from sleep deprivation? Regardless, I ran to the director's cabin and woke her up. She was furious. We woke the other counselors and the caretaker, who was equally enraged, and we scoured the area with flashlights. We found absolutely nothing. I was extremely unpopular at breakfast the next morning, but I had to report it. We had young girls whose safety was our responsibility. The incident was reported to the local sheriff. The flowers stopped for a while, and the exhaustion of the others made me doubt myself. They all believed it was just a fellow counselor's elaborate prank. I began to think I'd simply needed more sleep. The summer continued, but I was constantly on edge, overreacting to every sound. Then, during the last week of camp, the flowers returned, but this time they were everywhere. Outside my cabin, inside my cabin, at the craft house, at the bathhouse I used. They were a torrent, an aggressive claim of territory. I started violently throwing them away, totally freaked out. The sheer volume and placement felt less like admiration and more like a stalker's declaration. Furthermore, I noticed water and snacks were clearly missing from my fridge. People began to think I was on the verge of a breakdown. The final, biggest bouquet appeared on Friday morning, the day the campers were set to leave. I threw it straight into the trash. The terror was too real to dismiss as a prank any longer. That Friday evening, with all the campers gone, I returned to the craft house to begin cleaning up. The moment I walked through the front door, I was greeted not by silence, but by a large, coiled rattlesnake. It was utterly furious, shaking its tail with a deafening, venomous intensity. I slammed the door shut, cursing whoever had left the side door open for the creature to slither inside. But as I turned to run and get help, that prickly, chilling feeling washed over me, the absolute certainty of being watched. Goosebumps erupted over my entire body. My fight or flight response kicked in, an overwhelming shot of pure adrenaline. Without knowing why, my eyes shot up to the top of the dark ridge overlooking the craft house. Against the setting sun, at the very top of the inaccessible ridge, stood a silhouette. A man. He was looking directly down at me, and I could see his head tilt back as he was laughing. It was a clear, chilling sound that carried easily through the twilight air. I was a complex mess of shock, rage, and paralyzing fear. He had been watching me, waiting. Then his voice boomed down the hill, cutting through the silence. "Did you like this surprise?" That confirmed it. He placed the snake there, using the very thing we feared most. I finally had enough. I took off, running faster than I ever thought possible. I made it to the director's office, and this time, she believed the hysterical, gasping woman who burst through her door. The director immediately called the authorities. They searched the area again, thoroughly this time, but found absolutely nothing. No trace of the man, no footprints on the ridge, nothing. Just one very angry rattlesnake. We all left the camp that night. We usually stayed for another week to clean up and close the facilities for winter. But not a single person stayed behind. I have never been back. The camp was shut down shortly after that summer. He seemed to have reserved his terrifying, personalized attention just for me that season. I know the grounds are still used for group events, but the girls' summer camp ceased to exist. Needless to say, I pay far more attention now, and I seriously doubt I will ever let my children attend a summer camp. My last memory of unsettling fear comes from my childhood. In 2005, when I was just 10 years old, I lived in a small, remote village in the Highlands of Scotland. It was a lovely, close-knit place where everyone knew everything. A charming, but sometimes invasive environment. I was part of the Brownies, the younger version of the guides, and loved the camaraderie. Our school was tiny, so we were all like family. I excitedly received a letter about an upcoming camp. 2 nights on the grounds of our local village hall. This was shortly after my grandfather's passing, and I saw the camp as a necessary distraction, a chance for fun with my friends. We pitched our canvas tents on the small patch of ground just across the road where my family walked our black lab, Sky. We learned knots, made kites, and focused on earning our camping badges. But the first night was brutal. It rained heavily, and the thin canvas tents immediately began to seep water. I shared the cramped Slytherin tent, because of its green flag, with my sister, Alexandra, and friends, including the easily spooked Billie Jean. After a late night of scary stories, we finally fell asleep around 1 a.m. I woke up to a distinct, terrifying sound, a strange, persistent scratching noise, right against the tent canvas, just beside my head. I initially dismissed it as a night animal. The village was extremely rural, but then my sister tapped me. We were all awake. We heard the grass outside rustling, not randomly, but in a slow, calculated sweep. Then, a distinct human figure shadow moved slowly across the side of our tent, looming large, and Billie Jean was nearly hyperventilating. We tried to stay quiet, listening to the slow, heavy movement outside. Georgia and I, the bravest or most reckless, unzipped the tent flap to look out. The rain was blowing wildly, and parts of the field were already pooling with water. We scanned the small campsite, squinting through the downpour and the darkness. There was nobody there. The ground was muddy and empty. We quickly zipped the tent closed, forcing smiles, and told the others it was just the wind or a clumsy deer. We tried to settle back down, but the terrifying image of that purposeful shadow and the scratching noise was now sealed in our collective fear. Sleep was impossible for the next few hours. We just lay there, listening to the rain and the silence that felt too heavy. Around 4 a.m., a shrill, hysterical sound tore through the camp. A young girl screaming frantically. Georgia instantly recognized it as her 7-year-old sister, Olivia. Georgia sprinted out of the tent, Alexandra and I peered out to see a chaotic scene. Dozens of young girls running wildly in the heavy rain, their voices overlapping in panicked murmurs. Olivia was standing there, only in her pajamas, hysterically recounting her experience to Georgia. She had been wakened by a shadowy figure, laughing and violently scratching the canvas of her tent, which she shared with Billie Jean's sister, Eva. The entire camp was reduced to tears and panic. The Brownies leader, Stephanie, came out, yelling for calm, but the sense of security was utterly shattered. Olivia and Eva were moved to the leader's tent for the remainder of the terrifying night. Morning brought an uneasy calm, and mercifully, the rain had stopped. After breakfast, Stephanie called an emergency meeting in the hall. She was grave as she informed us that multiple reports had been made. One or two people had been scratching and making terrifying noises outside various tents. She demanded that whoever was playing the sick prank confess. Everyone, from the youngest girls to the oldest teens, stared blankly. None of us were responsible. Georgia, pale and shaken, went home ill that day. Billie Jean was desperate to leave. We tried to rationalize it as a prank by two local kids, Darcy and Tommy, but the idea of them sneaking out at 4 a.m. and orchestrating such terror across the whole camp was unbelievable. The possibility of something far worse, far more local, began to settle in. We tried to focus on the fun, making Harry Potter quizzes and chatting. But the second night, the same thing happened again. This time, there was no doubt. It was not a prank. The fear was now absolute certainty. Some of the older girls started speculating that it must be a ghost. Our houses were only 2 minutes from the hall, and the entire area was once a prisoner of war camp. During World War II, they whispered about the lost souls of soldiers who still haunted the grounds. While I usually scoffed at ghost stories, the chilling, methodical actions of the shadowy figure seemed to defy a living explanation. We finished the camp, got our badges, but the experience was deeply traumatizing. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling and unsettling, please give it a like. Comment below with your theory on the curse, and share this video to support the channel. I'll see you in the next nightmare.